Yeah, it seems incredible that it's 10 years have passed, and I'm thinking back to that immediate response, the chaotic night when the literally our whole world was turned upside down in Bali. As Australians know and love Bali, many hundreds of thousands of Australian travellers still going there and falling in love with the place. The last thing we could have ever expected in the Consulate-General was to be caught up in the middle of such a traumatic event.
We know it's a busy area for Australians, lots of visitors. So as a consulate, it would have been busy anyway. But to have this sort of the magnitude of this trauma, you would never have imagined you'd face that in your job.
No. Every post has their own contingency plan, and in that you try and scope out the sorts of things that might go wrong at a post. In Bali, I think we were looking more at natural disasters that might affect the post. And of course we're very small. There's 2 Australian-based officers. As you said, the reason for the post is that it's a very busy consular post with the normal day-to-day consular work. And then to have such an overwhelming event hit not just the consulate, of course, but the infrastructure and the Bali government. The medical services were quickly and completely overwhelmed. The infrastructure just couldn't cope with the scale of devastation that was caused. Hence the focus in those early days to initiate an Australian aeromedical evacuation, where we got every seriously injured person off the island within the first 36 hours, really. And that was our role. That was the task of the Consulate-General in those very early stages, was to find Australians, in particular Australians, but really it boiled down to anyone who was seriously injured. We evacuated many nationalities from Bali. But our role was to quickly find Australians in hospitals, in clinics across the island. And when we did locate them, was to stay with them, ensure we knew where they were, in the knowledge that a major aeromedical evacuation was on its way.
And as you look back on this, a decade on, can you describe to us the 24 hours, the 48 hours, from the time that you were told of this through? Because you were right on the spot.
That's right. Look, it's very looking back, it's very confusing. There was so much happening, but I was out with dinner with family and at friends, and we felt the explosion quite some distance away. And then one of my staff members who lived in Kuta rang me and said there'd been a massive explosion. So I guess I was on the scene within roughly 40 minutes, and it was a scene of total chaos and devastation. And when I realised there that the Sari Club in particular had been really demolished and Paddy's Bar had been affected, I knew from then that there would be significant numbers of Australian casualties. It's just inevitable. It was a real spot for the younger travellers to be. So from that moment on, we quickly initiated, as I said, that recovery effort. It's really a search and find effort. Because it was clear it became clear as the night went on that the hospitals just couldn't cope. The clinics and hospitals were, as I say, completely overwhelmed, and scenes of absolute chaos. I suppose, reflecting back, the thing that was that seemed at the time seemed to slow down, if you like. We obviously went right through the night for about 48 hours or so, until we were satisfied that every Australian was off the island. But that first word of that first plane was just heaven sent, really. It seemed like it was never going to come, and the subsequent planes, because there were just so many badly injured people who desperately needed to get to Australian medical facilities. Apart from that, it was, as I say, very chaotic. Injured people were coming into the consulate. Distressed families all through the night. Distressed families, obviously desperate to find loved ones who were missing. We had to put people out at the airport because there were reports of seriously injured people trying to get on planes, just ordinary international flights out, when they really should have been in a hospital or being evacuated. and really rallying around the tremendous and organising the tremendous efforts of local volunteers. The Australian expatriate community in particular in those first hours were just magnificent, and came quickly in and answered our calls and boosted our numbers, if you like, too, and did some very, very traumatic work, some incredible work done there.
And beyond the impact on the Australians, there was an enormous impact on the locals, wasn't there, as well, that you would have seen in its full scope?
Well, it was a very difficult situation, obviously, for the Balinese and the Balinese economy. It relies so much on tourism, but obviously the Australian government, in those first weeks even, it was still very uncertain what had actually happened, and of course the government had to put the welfare and health of Australians as its number one priority. So it was very challenging. The tourists stopped coming especially in the immediate aftermath of the bombing, and of course that had such an impact on the local economy, which we were aware of. But as I say, the number one priority is the health and welfare of Australians.
But it looks like that link with the Balinese is now once again very healthy. Australians have a fondness for the place, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I know in my early training, before I headed off to Bali, I was told that if anything serious happened in Bali, it'd be the biggest story in Australia, because so many Australians have been to Bali, so many have fond memories of Bali. In some respects, we think of it a little bit as our backyard, and so it was obvious that anything serious there was going to have and the withdrawal of particularly Australian tourists was going to have an enormous impact on their economy. But that's changed. I think Australians very quickly realised that it wasn't the Balinese people that had perpetrated this atrocity, and that great affection for Bali and the Balinese is carrying on now.
And on a personal level, it's obviously such a traumatic thing to go through, to see fellow Australians in such a tough place. How would you characterise it, describe this event in your career and in your life?
Well, look, it's obviously we had a huge impact on my work. We're trained to deal with these things. That's as I said, that's why we're there. If something does go wrong overseas, then it's our role to step up and to be that conduit, if you like, between the Australian response here and on the ground. But nothing could prepare you for what actually happened in those few days. I think the first 48 hours or so was just we were all just so focused on the job that we had to do. It was very hard, as I said, to understand what was happening. Very soon afterwards, we became aware that there were many Australians in Bali who were desperately searching for relatives, and we convened. The next thing, we moved straight into, if you like, after the medical evacuation, into the recovery effort, and that involved my hosting family meetings, and that's when the enormity of it really started to strike home to me, I guess, on a daily basis, dealing with the families, the many hundreds of people, families coming in, friends who were flying in, of course, coming in to help search, and of course the Indonesian response is they did a wonderful effort, but again they were very overwhelmed in the aftermath of the bombing as well. And I guess that really struck home. That was a very very challenging time. Was seeing the grief and the outpouring of emotion from the obviously very distraught families.
You will be there in Bali on the 10th anniversary. How important is it to you, and how important is it, do you think, in the overall healing process, that so many people are still very much engaged in?
Yeah, look, I heard a wonderful interview this morning actually on the radio from a survivor of the Sari Club bombing, and he spoke very eloquently on what it meant to him. we've all been through it, but I would never put myself in the same situation as a family member who'd lost a relative, or someone who was badly injured in the bombing. I just can't imagine what they'll be going through on this 10th anniversary.
Mr. Tysoe, thanks so much for your time and your reflections
Thanks,
at this difficult time for so many.
Thanks, Kieran.